All right, everybody, what we're going to do is turn our attention to our Supreme Court comparison FRQ and expect to find a Supreme Court case that you don't really know as your stimulus. So you should find a summary that's about 200 words, should have all the facts of the case, the question of the Supreme Court, and really ultimately the court's decision. And what you have to do is compare that and contrast it, whatever the case is that's given to you, to one of the cases that you do know or that you are familiar with. So one of those that we have explicitly and specifically gone through. So here we are given this case, this write-up as our case. Maybe we're familiar with this, maybe we aren't familiar with it. But again, what we're gonna have to do is be able to compare and contrast the prompted case with one that we are familiar with. So let's just kind of read through this. Hopefully you've had a chance to read through it. I'm actually not gonna read it all for you on video because I expect that you've already kind of done that. We're just gonna get kind of into the different pieces or the different components of what we're expected to do as far as the write-up. And then on the next page, I've got like a nice little kind of sample answer write-up that we can talk through as well. So let's talk about point A here. So identify a common constitutional principle used to make a ruling between Wisconsin v. Yoder and Masterpiece Cakeshop Limited versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. So we should be familiar with Wisconsin v. Yoder, but the Masterpiece Cakeshop case is what's mentioned up above. Now, point B, or piece B here, based on the constitutional clause identified in Part A, explain why the facts of Masterpiece Cakeshop led to a different holding than the holding in Wisconsin v. Yoder, and describe an action that supporters of religious free expression could take to respond to Masterpiece Cakeshop Limited versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Okay, so those are all the things that we're expected to do. So we're going to break down what we are expected to do as far as point A, and I'm going to kind of relate that back to what we've got as our sample answer here. So in point A, what we need to do is identify the constitutional principle that's found in both cases. Remember, a principle is a foundational concept like judicial review and separation of powers. Here, the foundational principle we see in both cases is the use of the free exercise clause. Let's repeat the prompt to make sure we are answering the question, then we will identify the principle that we are highlighting. So we're just kind of rephrasing what A is asking us of. So it's is asking of us. So it says the common constitutional principle found in both Wisconsin v. Yoder and Masterpiece Cakeshop is the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. So we are just identifying that. So it's really all that we've got to do. We don't really have to go into much more detail because really it just says identify. So we just have to be able to identify there. Now, point B1 has to be a summary of the facts of the required case that you need to know. You should summarize only parts of the case that are relevant to the stimulus, so be sure that you connect your required case facts clearly to the stimulus. So in point B2, so we'll kind of fully answer point B there, fully answer what's required there in B after thinking about how we can get the second point from B. So this requires us to talk about the relationships between prompted cases. So we need to identify that relationship, give an example of where the relationship is found, and then logically connect the concept and example by telling why or how the cases are related. So we can make sure that we do this by including a because clause. The prompt will also clearly tell us if we have to talk about how the cases are similar or different. So look for those words to direct our answer. So here, based on the constitutional thing, so led to a different holding. So we are gonna, kind of point out and clearly express why they are different. So let's try an answer to B1 first, knowing that we have already established our discussion is gonna be about free exercise. We should hopefully allow that to narrow down our discussion a little bit. So let's take a look at this. The Supreme Court struck down a Wisconsin state law that required mandatory school attendance for all minors through the age of 16. However, members of the Amish community successfully challenged the law as the state's interests in a high school educated population was not important enough to violate the religious way of life of the Amish, who end formal education after 8th grade. So here, again, just relating it back, based on the constitutional clause identified in Part A, explain why the facts of Masterpiece Cakeshop led to a different holding than those in Wisconsin v. Yoder. So here we are explaining the facts of Wisconsin v. Yoder to give a clear understanding that we see how that relates to free exercise. So you might even want to identify that this is what we're discussing in Wisconsin v. Yoder. Okay. Now that we've answered that first point from B, we need to connect our required case to the stimulus. So we need to show that there's a differing relationship, and we're contrasting the two because that's what the prompt tells us to do. So if it said compare, we would explain how the cases are similar. So we need to be sure to use specific language from our prompt and not speak in general terms. So we're going to avoid pronouns and, like that or this and things like that. So other vague language, got to make sure that we are very specific. So here's how we might earn that second point from B. So while Yoder clearly protected the free exercise of the Mennonite religion from a less important law on minimum educational experience, Masterpiece Cakeshop fails to clearly protect free exercise. Free exercise is an important right, but here the right is in conflict with another individual's equal protection. Not engaging in legitimate commerce with someone on the basis of a religious offense can demote the equality of another. However, the court does believe there can be situations in which religious objections in commerce are legitimate. Now, that's how we would earn that point. Now, the final point asks us to discuss something that someone who agrees or disagrees with the stimulus case can do to either limit or enhance the effect of the discussion. So this is an interesting point because it does ask us to recognize that the courts lack enforcement power and can be reinforced or ignored by political action. So again, we're going to be very specific about the actions, showing evidence of the prompt. So, citizens who support Jack Phillips' claim that his religious objections are important and should be considered can find a way to reinforce the right of the merchant to refuse to engage in commerce. States can ignore the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Equal Protection Clause and continue to reinforce religious freedoms. However, this may force the Congress and the President to take further steps to limit states, as was required of Eisenhower in Little Rock. And that's the Supreme Court comparison FRQ. Hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that's very clearly stated. So just to kind of piece it back to what we discussed as far as what was asked of us, we've got A. In these couple of paragraphs, we're talking about what's asked of us in B. And then this final one, we're talking about what's asked of us in C. So there we go. Take it easy, everybody. We'll see you next time.